Welcome to Normal Men, a podcast from four men who are clinging desperately to normalcy in an era when normalcy is impossible to find. We talk about what's happening, explain some of it, and joke with each other in order to stay sane. I'm George in Charlotte.
I'm Proctor Malone from the District of Columbia.
I'm low-tax speedrun enjoyer in outer Florida.
I'm Go Like Hell Machine in Antifa-controlled Portland.
I think this is going to be a bit of a moody discussion today, don't you think, George?
I thought we were done with the dad jokes. I prayed we were done with the dad jokes, and yet here we are.
See, now you can blame me. Last week it was Hell Machine and Proctor. Now I'll take full responsibility for this one.
As for who has full responsibility for the U.S. losing its last AAA rating from a independent ratings agency, no one's really to blame for that. It's a collective effort. We all got our credit score taken down a peg this week. The good thing is, unlike for a household or an individual who wants to go and buy a car and has a lower credit score, the U.S. credit downgrade from Moody's on Friday night, just after the stock market closed, is not super impactful. I think for people that are used to checking their FICO in order to get a lower loan rate on a credit card or a car, it's kind of crazy to think that a similar thing for a country wouldn't really make a big difference, but it truly doesn't. So let's back up. What is a ratings downgrade? There are three independent ratings agencies. There are others, but there are three that matter: Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. S&P downgraded the United States from AAA, which is its highest rating, back in 2011. And real heads will remember Erin Burnett on CNN ran a little chyron in the corner of her broadcast for years afterwards, talking about how many days it had been since the U.S. lost its AAA credit rating. So this was something that resonated at the time. Fitch followed in 2023, and Moody's now on Friday has cut the U.S. to the second highest tier of credit rating. So now there's no more AAA ratings for U.S. credit.
So to be clear, what these ratings are is there an independent agency that is trying to come in and say, if you lend this entity money, this is how likely it is that they're going to pay you back on the terms that you lent it. Is that
on the terms that you lent it is the key phrase there? Yes. So if I say, okay, Proctor, I'm gonna borrow $100 from you, and I'll give you $105 on May 19th of 2026, and I give you $105 on May 19th of 2026. I've done everything I need to do. Now, for private borrowers, this is very similar to saying how good of an investment an individual loan is or a bond is. For governments, it's very different, especially governments that are borrowing in their own currency, because the U.S. can go out and print literally unlimited amounts of the currency that they're borrowing, the U.S. dollar.
Oh no, the Federal Reserve is going to run out of money.
Right, exactly. Now, of course, if we're just this is called monetization of the debt. If we're just issuing Federal Reserve liabilities to cover liabilities of the federal government, that's going to have all sorts of bad implications for the US dollar, for inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is irrelevant from the perspective of a ratings agency rating. And it's interesting that Moody's, in the process of downgrading the U.S., cited stuff like debt to GDP and deficit levels and all that, when for the purposes of understanding, will a dollar borrowed get paid back, that's all irrelevant. Whether the dollar is worth the same amount you expect it to be when it's paid back, very different question, but that's not what ratings agencies are concerned with.
I noticed that today on the Sunday shows, Mike Johnson was talking about how the credit downgrade is a reflection on basically the Biden administration, without really acknowledging that part of the downgrade is based on what the upcoming reconciliation bill may actually do to both debt and deficit.
Yeah, I think if we leave aside for a second the fact that whether the U.S. is going to pay back in the dollars lined out in U.S. bond contracts the amounts that are owed, and divorce that from the fiscal backdrop. The fiscal position the country is in right now has very little bearing on whether that money will actually get paid back. If you think, though, that it would have an impact, you'd be wrong. But if you think that, you'd have to blame both parties, I think, to a large degree. There's no real distinction between either. Whether you look at the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the outlook for this Trump administration, each one has, in different ways and with different side effects, had a large impact on debt to GDP ratios and deficits. And we can talk about how the fiscal policy expansions under Obama and Biden did very different things from the tax cuts under Bush and Trump, and now Trump again. But at the end of the day, in the framework that analysis uses, which again I disagree with, it's an equal blame thing. The idea of Republicans blaming Democrats for this is nonsense. And I mean, you could probably make a case the other way too. That is all entirely beside the point from the perspective of this ratings agency, though, which is when S&P originally downgraded the U.S., it was over debt ceiling concerns. It wasn't. It was. Will they actually pass legislation in time to allow the Treasury to pay off the debt that they're supposed to pay off in the dollars they're allowed to pay it off in?
This Moody's upgrade seems to me like it is at least plausibly related to the upcoming debt ceiling cliff that we're headed for as well. Is that your sense, or is this independent of that?
No, they did it entirely on the fiscal position.
Okay, so
which is sort of what I'm saying. Like I think actually downgrading because you're worried that the debt ceiling will have an issue is a completely reasonable thing, because there is a real risk that the dollars obligated to be paid will not reach the place they're supposed to go in the time they're supposed to go. I mean, that's like a real thing.
And to translate that back to the household analogy, that's the equivalent of saying, screw these guys, I'm not going to pay my mortgage this month.
Exactly. Exactly.
Even if you have money in the bank to pay the mortgage, even if you don't have a cash flow problem.
I think the way to think about it is let's imagine a household where the wife would like to pay the mortgage payment, and there's cash that can be drawn from, I don't know, the home equity line. And the husband says, no, we're just not going to do that. I know we could very easily draw that cash, but we're just not going to do that because I've decided not to. It's an entirely voluntary default. There's nothing preventing, even in the most stressed market, there's nothing preventing Treasury from issuing new bills and bonds to then deliver the cash to existing investors.
I was going to say, what is Japan's rating? Do we know that? Because I believe Japan's debt to GDP ratio is about double ours. And Japan has no problem whatsoever borrowing on the markets. Its interest rates are extremely low. This just doesn't seem to be a thing that really matters all that much to any of these sovereign issuers.
Japan, to be fair, has a much lower rating than the U.S. does. So S&P rates them A+, Moody's rates them A1, Fitch rates them.
Fitch has them at A.
Yeah. Okay, Fitch, same. So they're all significantly lower rated than current. But again, the idea that there's any concern that the Ministry of Finance in Japan can't issue enough debt to meet near-term obligations is just. They are like the U.S. in the sense that they have a high degree of what's called monetary sovereignty. They don't have a problem finding buyers for their debt. We don't get it. We don't need to get into too far down the rabbit hole of why that's true for Japan and the U.S. and to a degree, Canada, Australia, the U.K., Germany. Germany is a special case, Eurozone. We're already down a rabbit hole. Suffice to say, some countries have more monetary sovereignty than others, and Japan, despite the lower ratings, has a high degree of monetary sovereignty.
So what you're saying is that this isn't like we're going to have to finance a 2016 Ford Focus at extremely high interest rates.
We are not. There was a small reaction at the long end of the Treasury curve.
Okay, that's just me then.
Yeah. Look, the Ford Focus is a great car because it's made by Ford. Isn't that right, Low Tax?
No, that's not right. It's a terrible car, as you all know my wife's Ford Escape saga.
Saga debacle. These are just words. Look, enough besmirching Ford. The long end of the Treasury curve, yields did rise a little bit, like 2 to 3 basis points. It's 2 to 3 1/100ths of 1 percentage point at the open on, or at the close on Friday. We may see another slight uptick. It's irrelevant. It doesn't actually matter. These are very small movements.
So if we think the bond markets are doing all right and that the Moody's downgrade is not a big deal, what else is going on with the U.S. economy right now?
Tariffs, baby. We're still talking about tariffs. Our big wet president decided that the Chinese had asked him nicely enough. It was the other way around, but whatever. And we are now in a much lower tariff environment with regards to China for 90 days. Reciprocal tariffs, you'll recall, were reversed after a week of market chaos back in April. Those were put on 90-day pause. We're not at the 90-day mark yet there, but it was always insane to think that anything other than a handful of these things would be negotiated in that 90-day window. And of course, that's what's going on.
And to be clear, the reciprocal tariffs, those are the pissing contest tariffs. Those are the tariffs that China levied on us, and then we levied back on China. China originally levied on us in response to the first wave of tariffs that we levied on China.
So I would break when we're talking about reciprocal tariffs, we're talking about the very high tariffs on everybody except China. The China tariff escalation has sort of gone. It's much more over the top than the reciprocal tariffs, which were the trade deficit divided by 2 thing that they did with the big board in the Rose Garden on April 2nd. Those did apply to China, but they then slapped a whole bunch of other numbers on top and took it to 145%. It's been walked back to 30%, not including sectoral tariffs, which are another conversation. And they're now talking about they're now negotiating the reciprocal tariffs with various other trading partners. So the big negotiations right now are the UK, where they announced a framework document, essentially, not an actual agreement, because you don't announce these things shortly. They're massive, massive negotiations.
And the Brits are not even taking our chlorinated chicken. And we're not even getting Greg's sausage rolls or anything like that. This is terrible.
Completely ridiculous that we can't have a Greg's on every corner in this country, let alone a Witherspoon's. But so we're in negotiations with the UK, the EU, India, Japan, Korea, South Korea, not North Korea. Well, maybe North Korea too. Who knows? It's roughly a dozen of these economies.
North Korea has a lot of tech workers they're willing to offer up to work for remote jobs.
Crypto lobby's very excited about North Korea's participation in the world economy.
So these big negotiations are underway, and the read that we're getting from, for instance, Japanese media is that. And also reporting on what's going on inside the European delegation and whatever, is that all of the professional negotiators are going like, guys, we really should not be giving anything to these people because they will cave eventually. They do not have the goods. Now, in the UK's case, they didn't really give away anything, to be clear, in the framework negotiations framework document that was negotiated. It's very generic stuff. Nobody's really surrendering anything. So I think the UK maybe took a slightly different approach to it, but also just did not want to surrender anything. Japan has upper house elections this summer, and the sitting government is under a lot of pressure there. In the EU, there is a pretty strong political coalition developing that against the far right. And we've seen that in Germany, and we've seen that we just had Romanian elections this weekend. Vibes are that you should hold out. And we've talked obviously about Canada and Australia, same deal there. So there's just so many of these countries that are saying, look, we don't think you guys have the juice. And so we're going to have a long protracted negotiation here.
A funny thing about all of this is that for basically the entirety of my life, Walmart has been closely associated with the Republican Party. as long as I can remember. And it was super funny to see Donald Trump tell Walmart to eat shit on tariffs earlier this week in a rambling Truth Social post, which is increasingly hard to distinguish from official White House press releases.
Walmart said on its earnings basically that they were going to raise prices in response to tariffs. That was going to happen. There is no way that Walmart could continue to operate its business the way it has for the past 40 years without raising prices in response to tariff. They just don't have enough margin to give. So we've said it before, American Maoism, we're all very excited about it. It's going to be great.
Have any of you guys ever been to Bensenville?
Thankfully, no, just Little Rock. Okay. That was bad enough.
Arkansas is what it is, but Bensenville is about as Republican as you get. So it's very funny to see these particular faces get eaten by this particular leopard.
Be careful what you say about Arkansas, because otherwise we're going to have like 50,000 Hogs fans shouting at us about how Fayetteville is like the nicest city in America.
Are you saying we're at risk of 30 to 50 feral hogs coming into our backyard?
I've heard pretty nice things about Bensenville recently. I heard they kind of fixed it up into Appalachian Wakanda out there with the Walmart money.
Appalachian Wakanda is a hell of a phrase.
I've not personally been. So what Trump is asking for from Walmart is that they just eat whatever incidents their suppliers are not eating to ensure that no price raises are passed on to consumers. And we've talked a little bit about elasticity. We're not going to get too much further into the weeds on that tonight. But anytime you have a transaction tax, you're going to have the incidence of that tax split between the various parties who are affected by that tax. It's not as simple as the White House has been saying, where their line has been for the last 3.5 months, that this is something that other countries pay. Other countries and entities in other countries will probably pay some part of it, depending on essentially who wants it more at what price. Or it might be that the transaction just collapses entirely if it no longer makes sense for anybody to transact.
We actually got some evidence on this week. So we got April trade price data. Trade prices measure the cost of goods landed on U.S. shores before any tariffs. They're not inclusive of tariffs. And if you look at the China trade price index, it was down slightly. It's down 1% this year. The effective rate on Chinese goods, tariff rate on Chinese goods in March is the latest data we have for that, was like 26%. So you can see that 1%, much smaller number than the 26% tariff rate. That means the incidence is almost entirely on U.S. entities.
And I just looked up Walmart's profit margin, their net margin on Google. It is 2.7%. Not a lot. Yeah,
they do it to you on volume.
Yeah, it's like that's giant for Amazon, but for a brick and mortar retailer, not so much.
So to bring it back to the trade negotiation thing, these negotiations are underway. There's clearly stuff happening. There are clearly conversations being had between DC and opposite numbers in Japan, in India, in the EU. It's not going to move very quickly. And meanwhile, there are over 100 other countries that are not able to negotiate right now because there's only so much bandwidth within the administration. And that 90-day clock is ticking. And earlier this week, the president said, well, those people are going to have to pay a tariff rate of some whatever percent. We'll figure it out. We're going to send them a letter. So the problem with this tariff strategy from the Trump administration is not just that, tariffs are bad or the tariffs are too high or whatever, but it's this constantly moving ball. It's this constantly changing situation where there's all these 90-day clocks running and all these different countries that don't know where they are vis-a-vis the administration. And there's no transparency as to what rate's actually going to get paid. And even if they want to negotiate badly, they may not be able to do so because they're too small and just not a priority. And it's a mess. It's just a mess. And that creates uncertainty, and uncertainty leads to less economic activity. It's just that simple.
I mean, the good news is you can keep up with all that stuff pretty easily. Just have the Elon and his little minions, as we've seen, the Doji guys are great at keeping up with a database. So all these clocks running and all the terms they're discussing, they got this.
Yeah, I have total faith that they can keep up with 90-day clocks on 195 countries. And remember who's importing what and who's exporting what in each of those. Sounds great.
The key thing is you have to ask Donald Trump to draw the clock. That's how you get the extra time. So we've gotten some of what I think is very good legal news in the past couple of days. The Supreme Court of the United States has stepped in to rule on an Alien Enemies Act case coming out of Texas. You may recall the Alien Enemies Act, but just a quick refresher. This is a 200-year-old law that allows us to, in times of war, kick out citizens of another country. The basic concept here is, well, what happens if we go to war against England, but we have all these English citizens here in the country? What can we do about that? The Alien Enemies Act says, well, you can escort them out of the country under these certain circumstances, under the circumstances that we have a declaration of war or an invasion or a predatory incursion. At that point, you can start rounding people up.
And just to be clear, having been to Tampa, I am in favor of invoking the Alien Enemies Act to get English people out of this country because they're wrecking the place.
Anyway, we've invoked it 3 times before the Trump administration in the history of this country. We invoked it during the War of 1812 against the English, and I think maybe against Canadians also. I'd have to check on that one. We invoked it during World War I.
Canadians were English people well, not English, they were British, but they were British subjects in 1812. So they would presumably have fallen under the same. Yeah, right.
We invoked it against the Crown. It didn't really work. We still got the White House burned, but we invoked it. We were out there. We were trying to make a play. World War I, we invoked it. World War II, we invoked it. The more horrendous human rights abuses you're probably thinking of in World War II, Japanese internment in particular, that was not Alien Enemies Act. That was under different authorities. But it has been used in past. The Trump administration's argument is that, and you're going to have to bear with me a little bit because I sometimes involuntarily laugh a little bit when I describe this argument. The Trump administration's argument is that gangs from Venezuela, because they are working in concert with the government of Venezuela, their incursions into the United States, when members of these gangs hop the border and come in as unauthorized, undocumented immigrants to the United States, that constitutes an invasion. They're simultaneously arguing that the gangs in question are enemies of the Venezuelan government. So there's a little logical hitch there. But that's the argument, that not just that we are being invaded, but that we are being invaded by these gangs as a tool of a foreign power. It's risible. It's complete BS. They made it up. They're trying to stretch the AEA to cover a situation that it unambiguously does not fit. Did the Supreme Court agree that it's an absurd situation? Well, no, that wasn't the ruling that they made this week. But what they did rule this week is that the amount of time people in Texas were being given to file a habeas petition to try to contest their removal under the AEA was insufficient. That ICE needs to give longer than a 24-hour period, and they need to give better access to attorneys and so on and so forth.
Can we give a little rundown on this very important legal concept of habeas corpus? Because I think for someone that isn't really familiar, it may not mean much. Maybe if you're a bit of a Civil War geek or something like that, you'll be familiar with Lincoln suspending it and that sort of thing. But if you're not an attorney...
The Trump administration doesn't like it because it sounds Spanish.
So habeas is one of the most ancient of legal rights, and basically what it means is that if you're being detained by the government, if you're being imprisoned by the government, you have to be able to say, hey, what's up? Why are you detaining me? You have to be able to petition, at minimum, an explanation and generally a direct contestation of your rights.
It's the legit version of, am I being detained?
Yeah, exactly. It's a more legalistic version because it brings you before a court. It's not just asking the direct detaining party to say why they're detaining you. It's you have to be seen before some kind of a tribunal to ascertain that, yeah, you are in fact being detained, and these are the reasons you're being detained for. Anyway, does get suspended from time to time in times of chaos, because habeas is by construction and by intent kind of a pain in the butt for whatever power is doing the detaining. If you're throwing a bunch of people in jail and they all have the right to go to court and ask why they're being thrown in jail, that is very inconvenient to you as the imprisonor. The way this ties in here is that the Supreme Court had previously ruled that it wasn't appropriate for the people who were being removed under the AEA to file for their release under a different set of law, but it was appropriate for them to file for their release under habeas, which is a reasonable legal position. It wasn't crazy at the time. What it did accomplish is switching jurisdiction on a bunch of this stuff from DC to Texas, which is kind of annoying, and mostly succeeded in getting this stuff out of out of Judge Boasberg's court. But what this ruling does is it reinforces that these guys need to actually have a shot at a legitimate habeas hearing, which the Trump administration had been pulling various funny business to try to prevent them from so doing.
It seems fairly obvious that it would be very difficult for someone who may or may not speak English to be apprehended by ICE, detained, imprisoned, find a lawyer, and request that hearing all within 24 hours.
Yeah, and one of the things that ICE is doing, and we're seeing this particularly in these snatch and grab cases from the Northeast, is they're moving people that they grab around through a bunch of different jurisdictions to make it more difficult for them to file habeas petitions, because you have to file a habeas petition where you actually are, where you actually physically are, with a few exceptions that the courts are pushing back on.
A question we're not going to get to tonight, but something that I am really curious about and that I've noticed Wyden and a couple of other senators have started to ask a lot of loud questions about, is where the funding is coming from for moving all of these folks almost immediately, like within hours of being detained, flying them entirely across the country. There's like, you look at the costs of what they're, even the assumed costs of what they're doing. It's very difficult to believe that this is legitimately within what they've actually been congressionally appropriated. So we'll talk about that a later time, but it's something that I think is important to keep in mind, that this is not what these funds were appropriated for.
Yeah, I suspect we're going to have a lot more budget talk in a couple of weeks as things heat up on the Hill. But going back to the judicial branch for a minute, let the legislative stew in its own juices. What SCOTUS did this week is they issued a per curiam opinion. I'll come back to that in a second. That reiterated that you do have to give these guys a legitimate shot in court to contest their removal through a habeas process. The fact that the ruling is per curiam muddies the waters a little bit. This has been reported in some places as a 7-2 ruling. It's not a 7-2 ruling. What per curiam means is that the entire court is issuing this, and it's an unsigned opinion.
These sorts of things are pretty unusual at the Supreme Court. There are a few really notable decisions that did come down per curiam. New York Times versus the United States, which was the 1971 case about the First Amendment and freedom of the press. Big deal. We won't get into it here, but that was per curiam. Bush v. Gore, who anybody who knows anything about American politics in the 21st century will recognize that. Trump versus Anderson, which was determining whether Trump could be thrown off the ballot in Colorado for 14th Amendment violations after January 6th. That was per curiam. TikTok versus Garland was another one. There have been a few other ones. Brandenburg versus Ohio is another one. That's the directed to incite or produce imminent lawless action case from Ohio, and basically is important for free speech tests or whatever. Anyhow, so there's a number of these that have come down, but they're very rare. They're not, if it sounds like I just rattled off 5 or 6 cases, oh, that must mean it happens all the time. No, it doesn't. This is very uncommon. And as the good Dr. Proctor was saying, it doesn't, just because 2 people dissented doesn't mean that 7 people were in favor. It just means they didn't say they wanted to dissent.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. There are more per curiam rulings than that, but it's rare that you get a per curiam ruling that isn't just kind of a pro forma. Yeah, we're just waving this through. Most of the time, per curiam opinions are just kind of the tap in. They're a tap in putt. We all agree with this. Please get this out of our face. You do see it, as George said, in cases where there are very serious conflicts sometimes. Typically what it means there is that the opinion, rather than being written by a single justice, is kind of a Frankenstein deal where multiple justices are collaborating. So what do we know about who voted what? Well, in this particular case, we know that there's a majority in favor of the holding. So there has to be at least 5 justices who agree with it. And we had 3 justices write separately, so we know what they think. We know that Kavanaugh was in favor of this holding, and no points for the 2 dissenters, but we know that Alito and Thomas were against it. So this could be anything from a 5-4 ruling to a 7-2 ruling.
Wasn't Alito's dissent longer than the actual opinion?
Yeah,
he gets like 19 pages.
He gets real wound up.
He also cited something that was saying the exact opposite of what he claimed the site said, which is shocking from a Supreme Court justice. He said, here's this, this is the thing I'm claiming. Here's the citation. And if you go to the citation, it says the literal opposite of the thing that he was saying. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's actually the next line. He's talking about what used to be the rules of federal civil procedure, if I remember correctly. And it's true that the site he found from 1980 says that habeas doesn't work this way. But then they amended it so that habeas now does work this way and has for the last 40 years. So it's something that, either one of his clerks was being just fantastically dishonest in writing this, or they're idiots. There's not really a third option.
Claude or ChatGPT could be the third option.
To be fair, it's not really that shocking from him. It might be shocking from any other justice. It's not actually that shocking from him.
I mean, this is a guy who threw out Roe v. Wade and was citing like some Brit from the 16th century who burned witches or something.
The overall tenor of this SCOTUS decision, I think, is really good for the good guys. It was clear that the majority is just kind of done with this crap. Again, this is them reiterating something that they thought they were pretty clear on the first time, but that the administration has chosen to push back against, to look for cracks in, to misinterpret, look for loopholes. I would say that the administration is stopping short of full on ignoring it, but I'm not sure that SCOTUS is still drawing that distinction.
Well, SCOTUS is also used to kind of 5-star gourmet quality solicitor generals and lawyers, and the Department of Justice is getting basically, they're like McDonald's level right now, about down to 7-Eleven quality lawyers who are arguing on their behalf, and that is also the quality of the cases they're making.
Once again, recurring theme, they are somehow running out of lawyers. How they're able to do this based on the demographics of this country, I will not understand, but they're somehow managing to do it.
They said it couldn't be done, folks. They said, no, you can't get rid of all the lawyers. It's too impossible. But we're doing it very strongly. And by the way, I could have had sex with Kim Basinger in 1990. I can tell you, folks.
One of the other reasons for SCOTUS's frustration here is that the direct decision that they were, I shouldn't say the direct decision, the direct action that they were overruling here was coming out of the Fifth Circuit. Fifth Circuit covers Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. And the Fifth Circuit is the unruly, wayward child of the federal appellate courts. They are extremely conservative. And without looking the stats up, I would guess that over the course of the last 4 years, probably over half of the cases that SCOTUS has overturned have been coming out of the Fifth Circuit. It's really, the Supreme Court is unhappy with how the Fifth Circuit is interpreting the law. And that's been an ongoing inter-office struggle for some time.
Is that like the one that Kaczmarek serves on?
Well, he's not Fifth Circuit, but he's a district judge within the Fifth Circuit. He rolls up to the Fifth Circuit. If that makes sense. So he's a trial judge, and then when they appeal his rulings, it goes to the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah.
And then,
in any case, the Supreme Court is very tired of the Texas courts saying everything out loud into a megaphone.
Yeah, and again, some of the subtext here is that there's a lot of judges on the Fifth Circuit who would very much like to be on the Supreme Court. And a couple of them feel that they're going to get a chance under Trump. So you have some amount of auditioning going on for those black robes from the junior varsity out in the Fifth Circuit.
Grunk, is this true? They broke my AA. We're building the best AI in the world. We're going to have it talk about the white genocide. The white genocide is not real. Grunk, isn't it true?
Grimes, tell me about the white genocide.
The white genocide is real. I'm going to hard code it into your outputs.
Grunk, why aren't you listening to me?
We should probably explain what it is that we're talking about.
We had something of a mystery emerge over on the website formerly known as Twitter in the last week, which is that all of a sudden, Grok, which is formerly Twitter's resident AI, was responding to queries of all kinds by telling you about white genocide in South Africa and about how they were singing a song about kill the Boer.
To be clear, it was responding to stuff that had nothing to do with any of these topics in any way, shape, or form, completely unrelated, and would just jump into it.
It just super wanted to talk to you about white genocide.
That's right.
And my understanding is that XAI, which is the part of the company that oversees that, did a little inquest into how this could have come to happen, how this could have come to pass. And what they found is that at 3:15 a.m. Pacific time, someone, identity unknown, could have been anybody.
We're all trying to find the guy who did this.
Banana suit hours.
Somebody in the middle of the night Pacific time reset the default prompting for XAI to talk about white genocide and talk about the attacks on farmers in South Africa, allegedly. I don't know who could have done this.
So let's back up. Let's back up just a little bit, because there's actually another story behind this. So earlier in the week, there were about 60 South Africans who had declared themselves as refugees, who were given essentially first-class priority treatment to immigrate into the United States by the United States State Department. They were dropped into white nationalist capital of the United States, Idaho, where I actually think that they're going to be a little bit weirded out, because these are folks who have interacted with black people in their lives, and there are lots of people in Idaho who have done less of that.
As if the Boise housing market wasn't stressed out enough already.
But so there's this is a claim of essentially political refugee status that nobody really takes seriously. There's no other country, there's no other organization that takes this seriously.
They're going to spend like 5 minutes in Idaho around these people, and they're all going to become like Antifa. They're going to become, like land back guys and all this stuff, and abandon the place.
Proctor, I feel like, what do you think about this?
So for those who may not know, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, right on the border between Idaho and Washington, and so this is my home territory. I got to say that I think these guys are not going to get a great reception, even in the wilds of northern Idaho. That there's a set of homegrown ideological racists that have been kind of nesting for a long time in parts around there. And while it's true that they don't like black people, they also don't like lots of other kinds of people. And one of the kinds of people they don't like is foreign people. So despite the obvious bona fides, despite the obvious credentials that the South Africans bring to bear, I think they're going to have a little bit of trouble ingratiating themselves with the locals.
Having also grown up very proximate to the wilds of northern Idaho, and it is a wild place for sure, I really can't wait to hear the takes from the people I grew up with in Canada about what's going on just south of the border, about 45 minutes away, because they're going to have lots of takes, and they always do.
Leave it to the Trump administration to screw up and misunderstand their relationship with white separatists.
Yeah, this is what we in the business call a natural experiment. So I'm excited to see where it goes. Anyway, so we have this background of a bunch of white South African quote unquote refugees jumping the queue, being let into the country, and for reasons that I think are pretty obvious to anybody who's keeping an eye on the power dynamics within the Trump administration and the people who care very deeply about South Africa. This is all Elon Musk driving the bus on all of this. And then we have someone who has access to the default prompt at XAI, rewriting the default prompt at XAI to talk a lot about the plight of South Africa and farm attacks and issues that are related to things near and dear to his heart.
And I liked that when he initially rewrote it, Grok was giving perfectly respectable answers on it and was saying, you know, the murders on the farms in South Africa are impacting all racial ethnic groups there, and they're actually impacting Black South Africans more than white South Africans, and it's really a story of crime rather than white genocide. And so it's very funny to me, and this was before Elon manipulated it further, of course. But it's very funny to me that Elon tried to design this like anti-woke AI, and yet somehow delivered an AI that you could ask questions to that would actually give you like half decent answers. Like even he screwed up, as he always does, but he actually seems to have screwed up in a good way in this case.
Reality, folks, it's woke. We can't have it. No more reality allowed.
That's right.
So the funny thing, well, there are many funny things about this, but so what happened was every time that you mentioned Grok on Twitter, so anytime that you type the @ symbol and Grok on Twitter to ask anything, you would get this insane kind of weird both sides-ish screed about white genocide and about the reality of white genocide in South Africa. And this included topics like Hawk Chua, how many times HBO have changed their name, and comic books.
You're just out there trying to get some news on like the Timberwolves game or something, and Grok is telling you about the song "Kill the Boer."
Yeah, it's like Grok, tell me about the weather in Astoria, out on the coast of Oregon, and then I get an essay on the validity of white nationalism or white genocide.
Yeah, it's interesting that it seems like it's fairly easy to make an AI obsessed with something, but it's somewhat harder to make the AI lie the direction you want it to lie. You can have it bring up a topic. You can get the AI to bring up a topic out of nowhere all the time, obsessively, but it's still going to pull from its full corpus in trying to explain that topic to you.
It's also funny that Grok was designed in a way that told you that he had been, or that it had been forced to say this to you. So it was literally saying, I was instructed by my creators to offer this prompt when you queried it about it. So it's not even, oh, we're being ham-handed. We're being ham-handed, and any investigation whatsoever will reveal what exactly we're doing. And I think it's this great example of the pernicious effects or potentially scary version of the world where AI is manipulating what we think about the world, but it's being done by such a group of complete idiots that it's completely ineffective. And I mean, it is kind of scary because it's like, well, if it's so obvious with these people, then it probably will be obvious in the future. Not necessarily, but in this particular case, they could be doing something pernicious. Instead, they're just being dumbasses.
Grunk, why are you being a snitch?
Yeah, it's not really ambiguous at this point that they're trying to use, that XAI is trying to use Grok for propaganda purposes. It's pretty clear that that's exactly what they're trying to do. And in fact, there are a couple other topics even after they fixed let's call it a bug, that made it talk about South African white genocide so much that it's bringing up out of nowhere that are also politically charged. But it's doing so now in a little bit more of a subtle way. So this is maybe a cautionary tale that should get, your hackles up, that maybe some of the things that the helpful AI is telling you are being told with an agenda that's mediated against, at least to some extent, by, like George said, by the essential ineptitude of the programmers, and maybe by some essential truth-telling qualities that AI has when it's not hallucinating.
Have you guys ever seen the show Say Nothing?
Yes.
About the troubles in Northern Ireland?
Yes.
So on the show, every episode, they put this disclaimer up. The show is about the troubles in Northern Ireland, and it sort of tracks the life story and history of, among others, Gerry Adams, who was the longtime head of Sinn Féin, which is a political party in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, that seeks to unite the Republic of Ireland with Northern Ireland. And at the beginning of each episode, there was always a disclaimer that read, Gerry Adams has always denied being in the IRA or participating in any IRA violence. And that's sort of how I'm reading these Grok things about the white genocide in South Africa now, where it bolts it on to random shit.
I mean, one of the funniest things that I find about this is that Elon Musk, as time progresses and Elon Musk gets older, he's just working backwards into retconning his entire origin myth, right? So originally he was a founder of Tesla. He was not a founder of Tesla. He was a hostile investor and he bought them out. And there have been a lot of stories like this. And now we're getting to the point where he is apparently a weeb for Boers. He is also not a Boer. That's not his family. His family are his family are English people. They're not actually the Dutch Afrikaners. So he's, who knows? Maybe he'll come up with a new origin story about how he was actually an IVF baby before he was born.
He is an Anglo-South African, but spiritually he is a Boer.
Yes, but that's not the same thing.
We're gonna get Elon like going to the Western Cape in South Africa and doing a land acknowledgement for the ancient swamp Germans of the Western Cape.
Anyway, all of this sort of explains why you've seen all the different reports about why at Tesla, why at SpaceX, why at a bunch of other companies, they spend enormous amounts of money to hire senior managers and senior executives whose entire job is to keep Elon Musk from actually meddling with the business that makes them money.
Thanks for listening to Normal Men once again this week. We would really appreciate it if you could rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and share it with your friends. For all the normal men out there, I'm George.
I'm Proctor.
I'm Low Tax.
And I'm Go Like Hell Machine.